Once again, a very warm welcome to all of our attendees this morning. Now, this morning we are discussing biological hazards. As we mentioned last week, there are many hazards to being a plumber. Whether you're a plumber in the industry or whether you're a health and safety professional in the industry, you realize that risk and hazard is part of the job. But hazards, when it comes to being a plumber, are quite numerous. Now, we know that there's smaller or lower type of risk work that you do. There's also medium risk, there's high risk work that you do. But as a plumber, you are constantly exposed to risks and hazards. And for one, we really appreciate that you take the effort into ensuring your work is done safely. More importantly, that you've done this in order to protect those around you. Not only are you protecting them by giving them clean water and removing raw sewage out of a building, but you're also performing this work in order to ensure that it is done safely. And so thank you very much for doing that. And we ask that you continue to make that part of your risk management program. Now, when it comes to being a plumber and when it comes to looking at the hazards and all the types of tasks and work that you do, you're going to be working in confined spaces. You'll be working on heights, such as working on platforms, scaffolding, ladders, even mobile elevated working platforms, such as your cherry pickers and scissors lifts. You have the risk of eye injury from flying particles. You have the risk of slipping, tripping, and falling, especially when working in wet environments. As we mentioned last week, working with water. I'm sure many of you do work with water as a plumber. It's part of the job. Burns from hot equipment parts, steam lines, and even the release of hot water or steam from boilers and geysers. Working with various types of tools, from hand tools to powered electric tools. You also have the hazard of stress. It is a stressful position to be in, and sometimes comes along with a job. Work stress is also a hazard. Then working shift works or working extended work days, especially to get those projects done on time. Now, oftentimes, and something that should never be done, especially when working at heights or in confined spaces, but often a plumber has to work alone. And this could be because of shift work or extended work days. Then some other hazards are exposure to hazardous chemical substances, flammable products. And today, what we want to discuss is biohazards, the exposure to this type of hazard and how dangerous it actually is. The potential for infection from bird or rodent droppings because of the areas and environments that you find yourself in as a plumber. Working in awkward positions. One of the main things on a construction site is getting the designer, the architect, and the builder on the same plan. So everyone has a different vision, and sometimes what the architect sees or what the designer sees is not really what the builder can do. Or maybe it's the opposite. What is being designed and what the architect has put in place is not being built according to those drawings by the builders. And this is an ongoing debate. And oftentimes the plumber comes out short when it comes to these meetings because they don't view you as really part of the solution, where you should actually be part of the solution. You can give so much input on how much easier plumbing can go in if it is just taken into consideration at the basis of any project, ensuring that these types of works, especially if they want them concealed, should be part of the program at design level or design phase. And the input of a plumber, a proper plumber who knows what to do and how the water flows and where you're going to get the least amount of risk and hazard on site, should be done. And so we appreciate, and we're not saying that we do not understand that the hazards of being a plumber or the stress and irritation sometimes that you find on site. We say that we sympathize with you, and we also understand that it can be a very difficult task. But once again, we want to say thank you because you've pushed through that and you continue to perform your work. Now, at times, as we mentioned, you're going to be lifting heavy or awkward objects, especially through maybe small areas in order to get your boilers in there or geysers or even your piping through areas that might have already been built and you needed to be there last week, but there was miscommunication as it goes into site. Or perhaps it's a new structure that's already been built and you are now coming in afterwards to do some maintenance or repairs. This can also be difficult, and you will then be exposed to electricity, extreme temperatures, or even noise on these various sites. So we do understand being a plumber is not easy. There's a lot of tasks that you perform that you make look very simple, but I'm sure it isn't, especially if somebody who's not a plumber has to actually do it. So once again, thank you, and we appreciate you as plumbers. But why are we talking about plumbers, especially when it comes to biological hazards? Well, there's a staggering thing that we read to you not so long ago in a Toolbox talk, that 1 in 5 people do not wash their hands. So this is at all. They do not wash their hands. And this is before eating, after using the toilet, after blowing their nose, after sneezing. They just do not wash their hands. But what's even more staggering is out of the 4 people that do wash their hands, 30% of them use soap. All right, so 1 in 5 don't wash their hands. Then of the other 4, only 30% of those actually use soap when washing their hands. Now you might think to yourself, wow, that is terrible. Where are we getting this information from? Well, studies have been done, tests have been taken, especially on people's hands, before and after eating, before and after using toilets. And you know how these studies go. Annually, more than 160 million people are diagnosed with an occupational illness, with more than 2.3 million of these cases being fatal. Now, this is worldwide. This is not just in South Africa. This is worldwide. And this is because occupational illnesses is due to either bad hygiene or bad working practices. And you'll see the 4 main reasons for occupational injuries below. This is chemical substances, solvents, carbon monoxides, asbestos, all of these hazardous substances that we work with that are not being worked with correctly. Then you've got the physical side, the noise, radiation, excessive heat. Again, work practices that are not being performed in the correct manner to protect us from the risk and hazard that we are being exposed to. And there you see the third killer, the biological, your viruses, bacteria, and molds that we are exposed to on a daily basis when performing various plumbing works. And these are also contributing to the 2.3 million cases of people dying due to occupational illnesses. And then finally, your ergonomic, this is your repetitive strain injuries, your musculoskeletal injuries, lifting heavy objects, working in awkward positions, bending over and hurting your back, shoulders, neck muscles, your feet, your hands. All of these take a lot of strain. But we're going to focus again on biological hazards. And why biological hazards? Well, that's because you are working with raw sewage, and diseases involving sewage can have instant effects on the human body. Now, this is something that's very unique, obviously, to raw sewage and many other types of hazardous chemicals that you deal with, such as chlorine. I mean, obviously, if you inhale that or if you breathe it in, you can have immediate damage. So it's instant effects on the human body. And this is exactly the same with raw sewage. Now, there's 3 main risks that are present because of raw sewage, and that's viruses, bacteria, and parasites. Now, these viruses, bacteria, funguses, and these cause intestinal, lung, and other types of infections. Now, why do they cause infections? Well, they're there all the time. Many of these types of bacteria are actually found naturally in soil. And we learned that at the beginning of the month with the Legionnaire's disease, Legionella bacteria, which is a very common bacteria that is found in soil. It's the same as E. coli. E. coli is also found in the soil. So when you're digging trenches or when you're digging excavations, when you're just digging around an area to expose a drain or a waste site, even that area around it has the potential to have bacteria, fungus, parasites, not just the raw sewage itself. And this is something that we really, really want to emphasize with the plumbers. We get to site, and please, we're not pointing any fingers. We're not saying anything wrong. We're just pointing it out as something that we need to look at. If we are doing this on site, we just want it to be a good reminder for you to protect yourself and your employees. Before we start working on the waste pipes, removing them, changing them over, repairing them, unblocking them, we sometimes need to dig around the area of the infected place in order to expose that pipe so that we can start working on it. But because it might be broken or leaking, what some plumbers are not understanding is that this leak or this exposure to the sewage that's inside there is actually leaking or seeping out to the soil around the pipe. And so what we are noticing is hand tools are being used to dig in and around this area, but no safe work practices are being put in place to protect the individual doing this from the viruses, bacteria, or parasites that could be found in the very soil around the actual piping. And then we notice gloves and goggles and masks or respirators being put on once we expose the actual the intestines of the sewage from the actual pipe. And this is where the danger comes in. We're not taking enough precaution on setting up the work as we are when we're actually performing the work that we've quoted for. So on our quote, it says, replace a sewage pipe or replace a waste pipe, and that's great. But what about all the works that go up to set it up, to dig it up, to remove that pipe? All of this is called safe working procedures or risk assessments that need to be put in place. And so this is something that was of a concern when we arrived on a few sites. And that's why we are talking about biological hazards, not just from raw sewage that you might be standing in or working with on the piping itself, but even that might leak out or seep to the area around the actual piping. So please take this into consideration the next time you start digging up to replace, repair, or unblock these types of pipes. So what are we talking about? Work practices, safe work practices. Now, human pathogens from soil and raw sewage can enter the body through the nose or mouth, particularly if a person drinks contaminated water or, and this would specifically be in working in plumbing, touching contamination and then touching your mouth and nose. Now, we've been bombarded with COVID-19 protocols. Make sure you wash your hands as often as possible. Use soap and water. Otherwise, if you don't have this available, use a hand sanitizer with a 70% alcohol in order to kill any viruses or bacteria. And then if you sneeze or cough, don't touch your face. Try and wash your hands again. If you had that tissue that you coughed into, throw it into a waste paper basket. So all of these things are very similar because it creates disease, it creates illnesses. But before COVID, we worked with waste. So why is there still so many deaths? Even now when we are living through a pandemic, and the pandemic just seems to be increasing. In fact, there are more and more cases every day. You think by now we would have learned not just from COVID, but from any hygiene practices, how important it is to wash our hands before we eat, wash immediately after touching raw sewage. So let's take a look at it again as a reminder. Exposure can occur through open wounds or inhaling. This would be specifically through human pathogens in dust, for example. So to avoid exposure to sewage by wearing gloves, coveralls, rubber boots, eye protection, washing your hands, and decontaminating your equipment after use. Now, the health effects of exposure to sewage and contaminated soil include things like tetanus. Now, tetanus is caused by a toxin produced in a bacteria that is common in soil and sewage. Now, again, it's common in the soil around the sewage and in the sewage as well. Tetanus can also be pretty lethal. Then you have hepatitis A, hepatitis B, as well as hepatitis C that is in these bacteria, these viruses that are found in raw sewage. Bacteria such as E. coli and other parasites are also found in raw sewage. So there is so many things. The parasitic worm that can be found inside raw sewage all has the potential to expose us to very deadly viruses that could lead to serious illness and potential death. Many will get ill and they will get better, but nobody wants to be ill. We take for granted when we're feeling healthy. As soon as we get sick, we cannot wait to feel better again. But when we're feeling better, we forget what it's like to be sick. So we're not saying that that's how you must walk around every day thinking about the last time you were sick and how bad it was. But what we are saying is take a look at the health effects and the exposure to this type of biological hazard and protect yourself from it. So do not eat or drink while working in a potentially contaminated area. If your task is such that you're working with biological hazards, wash your hands before you eat and eat in an area that is clean and hygienic, not in the infected area. After working with raw sewage or even the soil that might contain parasites, please remember, wash immediately with soap and water. This is very important. Don't just go to the nearest tap and wash off with water. And maybe you say, and this has actually been said to us, which was quite funny on one site, there's no soap on this site. There's only water. Now you can see the funny side of that, because buying a bar of soap and keeping it in your toolbox doesn't really cause too much overheads, I'm sure. Having a bottle of hand soap available for your team is also not very difficult. And I'm sure if you had to look hard enough, you would find some sort of cleaning product on a site in order to wash your hands. In other words, there should be no excuse that we cannot wash our hands with soap and water while we are working on a site. And if there is no running water, well, bring water with you. That's also not too difficult. So after working with raw sewage, please wash your hands immediately. But don't use solvents to wash your hands, as the solvents can cause irritation that may lead to skin infection. So please don't use Jik and bleach to wash your hands. Use a normal soap. Just a normal hand soap will do. Then something very interesting, learn more about hand washing and the risk of infections. COVID has taught us how to wash our hands, how to not just clean the underside of our hand, but the top of our hand, between our fingers, our fingernails, and even our wrists. And then also perhaps learn a little bit more about the risk of infection, especially with the type of job that you are performing. Then change out of work clothes before leaving the work site. Now, if this is not possible, we are going to request that you try and make a plan. Is there something else that you can do? There's not always the potential for us to be able to change on site. And some of us go to 6, 7 different sites during the day before you go home. And so we also appreciate this. Now you into sewage, then you into your vehicle, then you into another vehicle, and then you're onto a different site. And you can just see how the potential for exposure and cross-contamination between sites and vehicle and clothing can start to build up and create an environment that is pretty unhealthy for ourselves or those who are in the vehicles with us as well. So why not just sit back and think, try and plan? There is a possible way of preventing this type of exposure. Now, you might think at this very stage, there isn't a solution, but perhaps it's just because we're not looking at the bigger picture. And if you need assistance with this, I'm sure we can find somebody that is either succeeding in getting it right, or perhaps we can look at it from a health and safety perspective and come up with a solution for you. Obviously, we know we are always looking for a cost-effective solution, but please remember, as health and safety practitioners, the first thing we look at is the protection of life. We want to protect and preserve life. That is our most important thing. And it's the same with a plumber. You want to protect life by giving clean, fresh water and removing sewage. So you can appreciate why we always look at life as more important than the cost that is involved with that. But where we can, and we can find it at a very good rate for you, this is exactly what we are trying to achieve for our members. So if you can, again, as a reminder, soiled work clothes should be sealed in a plastic bag and laundered or washed separately from other clothing. So don't put it in with your general clothing at home. It could be soiled with potential pathogens that might not be cleaned thoroughly with the other washing. It could spread to your other washing. And think about it. You have kids, you've got families at home. You do not want to expose them to the very dangers you need to protect yourself from on site. Again, it's mentioning wash your hands thoroughly after handling the clothing. Again, with soap and water. Now, something just very funny, and I hope I'm not going to offend anyone with this. So please, this is not in the interest of offending anyone, but not so long ago, I had a continuous-based risk assessment program, and you can see how that could turn out quite funny. Continuous Risk Assessment Program, or CRAP. And working with Sewage, you obviously want to take your daily continuous risk assessment program and implement it. And somebody found this very funny when I designed a continuous risk assessment program because of what it spells out. And so we found this very funny, especially thinking of today, talking about Sewage. And we just wanted to let you know that we have changed this name. It is now a continuous risk management program. But we thought we'd go into the old one just to give you a bit of a laugh for today, give you a bit of humor, and then also say that maybe you won't forget it now. It's a very powerful and important form of assessment. These types of DSTIs, or job hazard analysis, a continuous risk assessment is vital for any company in preventing risks and hazards, or the exposure at least to risks and hazards. We appreciate you are not going to get rid of everything. You cannot eliminate all hazard on site. But what you can do is you can identify hazard with the purpose of immediately treating the possible risk. Now, the benefits of this type of program, and just for humor today, we are going to use the CRAP, the Continuous Risk Assessment Program, so that you remember when working with Sewage that you need to do a daily continuous risk assessment program, such as your DSTI or your JHA, your job hazard analysis. There's many different types that you can use. We've given you a few samples of this online as well, but if you need it, please let us know and we will assist you. Now, the benefits of this is that it can be used as a teaching tool. So this document is done with the employees on site. And so you're teaching them about hazards and risks while doing this program. You will assist with the now, what is currently happening on site, the task at hand, not the risk assessment that you did at the beginning of the program that might have been forgotten about now. Then it also helps in showing what safe work procedures are needed right now. Again, a good reminder for explaining to your staff what safe work procedures have to be in place right now. And that keeps everyone on the same page, especially when it comes to mitigating risk on site. And this is what we want to achieve. So from now on, we will only refer to it as a continuous risk management program, but we hope you had a good laugh this morning. And then to finish off, we want to invite you to please take advantage of the free COVID-19 Compliance Officers course. Remember, we have designed 2 courses for you. There is the COVID awareness course. That is just a 4-part, 1-module series for employers and employees. You answer a few questions and you receive a attendance certificate that you've been made aware of COVID-19 as well as the protocols. But if you want to take it a bit further and perhaps you're being appointed as a Compliance 19 officer, or you want to be appointed as a Compliance 19 officer and you need a little bit more information, well, then take the free IOPSA and OHSS Savvy Consulting online COVID-19 Compliance Officer course. It comes with 2 SIOSH CPD points as well as 3 PIRB CPD points. So if you're doing it just for CPD points, well, enjoy it. We hope you enjoy the program. If you'd like more information on that, my number is there, 071-875-2070. Otherwise, you can email me, chris@ohss.co.za. Again, it is free, so take advantage of this as members. If you are not a member, please reach out to us and we'll let you know how you can have access to this as well. So once again, a very big thank you this morning.